Hello, I'm Mr. Orange and this is video hashtag 712. In this video, I'm having another discussion, and this discussion seems to be very coincidental, especially considering to my last video. It is where I talked about how the specialist could be upgraded. And in this discussion, I have this question. So the question is, what is my favorite weapon in Winx Club? And for that question, there's so many things I need to think about. And also, I don't want to just give away a straight answer just for this question. Because in Winx Club, there are so many weapons. I mean, you have to consider the specialist weapons that are used, but as well as weapons that are used by non-specialists too. Like, for example, Sky uses a sword and shield. However, the weapons that the guards use in Season 3 is a bow and arrow, so obviously they are completely different. I think for this question I will state my favorite weapon at the end, but I think this is a great way to talk about all the weapons from Winx Club from Season 1 to Season 4, considering that, I've only covered from Season 1 to Season 4, like Episode 13. I haven't gone past Episode 13. Who knows, maybe in the future I will talk about weapons over there. Like, when we get to Season 6 or Season 8, where, the specialists get whole new weapons. First off, we're gonna go through weapons that were introduced in Season 1, and I'm going through chronological order. Also, with every weapon, I'm going to rate each of the weapons green, yellow, or red. This is to indicate my feelings towards these weapons. Green means that I like these weapons, they're really good. Yellow means they're kind of mediocre, but it's okay, whatever. Red means that I don't like those weapons. And I think we're going to start off this discussion with Stella's weapon. It's called the Celeria Scepter, or in the Ray version, it's called a sword ring. Either way, it's called a scepter, and it's what Stella uses throughout her magic Winx. So the Celeria Scepter seems to be an extension of Stella. This is what she uses in her combat. And with her scepter, she can cast strong magic spells. It's really hard to imagine having her magic wings without the scepter. I can't decide if I want to put this weapon in a green category or yellow category. I think this weapon is really good. She uses it a lot throughout her time, and it's pretty iconic for the storyline because it's what it's what the tricks were always after in the first 4 episodes. However, in design, it is kind of ugly. I do think the Nickelodeon version of this is way more prettier. I think when they added that pendant to the scepter, it made it more visually striking. So because of the visuals, I would have to give it a yellow flag. The next weapon that gets introduced is Riven's weapon. So it seems to be a magenta bowler and a dagger. To me, I think this is Riven's iconic weapon. Especially when it comes to the bowler. I love it when Riven spins it around, it makes him look cool. I would consider it as a heavy artillery, and I think it suits Riven really well. I do think he doesn't need the dagger, because I don't think he uses it as much. I do think it's interesting that these two weapons are paired to each other whenever he's fighting. Maybe he could do without the dagger. However, because it looks really cool, I would have to give this weapon a green flag. The next weapon I should talk about is Timmy's weapon, which seems to be a yellow gun or pistol. This is Timmy's primary weapon. It's hard to see him without this weapon throughout Winx Club. He uses this gun to shoot yellow laser bullets coming out of it. And this weapon is pretty iconic, even for Timmy. And I would say this is probably like the strongest weapon I can think of because it is a gun. You're shooting at an opponent from a far distance. So I would have to give this a green flag as well. The next weapon I should talk about is Sky's sword and shield. So these weapons come in a cyan color. I think the shield stops it from looking generic. And it does make Sky look like a heroic person. However, nonetheless, it is just a sword and shield, and it's not the most interesting weapon. Being that, like, swords are pretty common, especially in Winx Club. So, with that being said, I would have to give Sky's weapon a yellow flag. The next weapon in discussion is Brandon's green broadsword. I do like that it's not just a generic sword, it is a different type of sword. Like, I like that the specialists get the different variation of the swords. Like, obviously, Sky has a regular sword, but Brandon has a broadsword, which is bigger. However, just because they're different type of swords doesn't change my opinion how I feel about these swords. So Brandon's green broadsword is going to get a yellow flag as well. The next weapon introduced that we should talk about is Riven's second weapon, which seems to be a magenta saber. So this is a different variation of the swords. And out of the three from like Sky, Brandon and Riven, I say Riven 1 is the most interesting because it's the more visually distinct, being that it's curved. And I do think it's interesting because it is a saber, so I do have like cultural connotations towards it. It does make me think of weapons that the Arabians would use, or maybe pirates. However, cultural connotation isn't enough for me to give it a yellow flag, because yet again it's a sword. And technically these count as well. In episode 5, the Winx girls use a knife to cut out potatoes. I mean, they could use a potato peeler, but yet again, it's a knife. Kind of generic. Like, could you imagine them using this in the like battles? So I would have to give these knives red flag. Okay, I'm not sure what you call the next weapon. It's Timmy's second weapon. So this weapon has the ability, to shine light, kind of like a torch. So what Timmy does with this weapon, he pulls it out like a sword, but obviously there's no blade behind this. But instead, it's a yellow shining globe. I don't think we ever see this weapon again, but I think it's pretty useful. It's not the worst thing ever. I wish this weapon got a lot more like appearances. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's also not the best thing ever either. So I would have to give this weapon a yellow flag. I guess this should count as well. Cleaning products. It's a pretty useful weapon if you don't have magic. It can be used to make a monster slip. However, as creative that is, it's still very generic and boring. So this has to get a red flag as well. I'm debating if I should include this, but I guess it counts as well. So in episode 8, a Bloom uses a vase of flowers to spill water all over Riven. As you can see, I'm not too fan of generic weapons, so I would have to give this a red flag as well. The next weapon is worth noting as well. It's created by the Tricks. It's a helmet that they trick Bloom of giving it to Riven. So with this helmet, they control Riven's mind. I actually kind of like this weapon, but it's not the best thing ever. It's not generic, but it's not like mind-blowing. So this has to get a yellow flag. The next weapon I should talk about is Whispering Crystal. And I'm counting these. These are the weapons that the tricks use to either summon monsters or steal the dragon fire. The focus version is called Whispering Crystals, but in the Cinnalune version it's called Vacuums. The focus name of this weapon is so much superior. These Whispering Crystals were so iconic in Season 1, and I know they brought it back in Season 5, but it would be nice if they used it again in like Season 2 and 3. It's never explained why they never used it again. These are iconic. In no hesitation, these Whispering Crystals are getting a green flag. You know what? I'm counting this as well. It's a piece of brick that was thrown by Mr. Bonner and Mr. Brown. They chucked it at a window of Vanessa's flower shop. I mean, I'm not gonna underestimate a piece of brick as a weapon. I mean, I have watched Home Alone and seen, Marvin getting hit by 4 pieces of brick. Yeah, I can see, it can do a lot of damage. Nevertheless, it's a boring earth tool. And I have to give us slack. The people who threw it were earth people. However, this doesn't change my feeling about this weapon. It gets a red flag as well. The next weapon I need to talk about is a baseball bat that Mr. Bonner and Mr. Brown used to break a vase with. I mean, I couldn't get a really good screenshot for this weapon. Even if I got a screenshot of a really nice baseball bat, it doesn't change my feeling about it. Like I said, it's an earth tool, it's a basic weapon. I mean, if I specially used a bat, that would be really cool, but it's a very basic, boring bat. So this is getting a red flag as well. You know, if a specialist had a Phantom Blade as a bat, I would have given a yellow flag, but no, it gets a red flag. In this screenshot, we get 2 background specialists. The one on the left is using a purple dual sabers, and the one on the right is using a red sword and shield. They have actually given a name to the purple one. His name is Bishop. I don't think they gave the rest of the background specialists their names. I think both of the weapons are cool, although I would say Bishop's weapon is much more cooler. I think dual sabers are really fun. However, nonetheless, I would have to give both of these weapons yellow flags. I'm just going to run through these background specialists. They're using blue swords. Anytime I see a sword, I'm just going to give it a yellow flag. But then we have this specialist. I'm not sure what weapon he has. I think there's some sort of shield or gauntlet. Let me know what you think this is. But with this weapon, he creates an electric storm. You know what? I think that's really cool. I think I'm gonna give this a green flag. And then we get introduced to Saladin's weapon, which seems to be a dragon-shaped staff. And with this staff, Saladin casts magic. He is a wizard after all. You know what? I think Saladin's staff looks really cool, so therefore I would have to give it a green flag. The next weapon we're going to mention is Brander's next weapon. It seems to be a double-bladed saber, which I think is significantly better than his broadsword. And with this weapon, it adds a visual flair to his, combat style. It makes it look really cool, especially when he spins it around. I know it's just 2 swords stuck together, but this is more than just a sword. I don't ever see this weapon more often, in any media actually. But I think it makes Brander look really cool when he uses it, so I'm gonna have to give it a green flag. The next weapon we need to discuss is Riven's weapon. I did manage to get a screenshot of his weapon, and they seem to be shurikens. You know what? I say yes to this as well. I think shurikens are pretty cool as a weapon, so I would have to give this a green flag as well. I noticed this guard has a sword, so I would have to give it a yellow flag. However, it's not that impressive, but you know. Next, let's talk about Sky's weapon, which I think is pretty cool. His weapon is a cyan colored boomerang, and I gotta say, this is so much better than his previous weapon, which is a sword and a shield. I think I really love this. This is pretty cool and iconic. And the boomerang is such a fun use as a weapon in fiction. And when I think of a boomerang, I think of fun things like a monkey game. I can't remember what it's called, but it used to be a flash game where this monkey would spin around a boomerang to pop balloons. So anyway, I think this weapon is such a fun addition, so I would have to give it a green flag. Next, let's talk about Corder Torto's weapon, which seems to be a blue battle whip. This is another iconic looking weapon. I really love this. I think it looks really cool, so therefore I would have to give Corder Torto's blue battle whip a green flag. And we can't forget this Ogron lookalike with his Wolverine claws. Heck yes, I love this. This is getting a green flag too. Then this next specialist threw these metallic sharp objects at an opponent. I have no idea what these are, but it does look basic looking, so I would have to give this weapon a yellow flag. We also have this generic crossbow that the Heraklian gods have used in the aircraft while they are trying to save Sky. It's not all that interesting looking. I mean, they do shoot out other things other than a regular bullet or something. But other than that, it is kind of basic. So I would have to give this a yellow flag. Okay, in this screenshot, we have two background specialists. On the left is a specialist holding a red broadsword, and on the right is someone using a purple spear. At least that's what I think. I mean, I don't care that much about the broadsword, so that's obviously getting a yellow flag. However, that purple spear that the specialist is holding looks pretty cool, and I think this is the first time we have spotted a spear. I mean, heck yes, this is getting a green flag. We then see Codotarta's second weapon. We have seen him use a whip before, but now it's time to see his second weapon, which seems to be a bluish-black sword. However, this isn't just a generic sword he's holding. What we can see with his sword, there are 3 rings attached to it. Now this makes his sword look really outstanding. It's definitely superior to Sky's, Brandon's and Riven's swords. Like remember that, Brandon has a broadsword and, Riven has a saber. That being said, it still gets a yellow flag. His whip was much better. The next weapon is a giant icicle which the Yeti uses out of the ground. And with the icicle club, it tries to attack the Winx girls. I know people are gonna feel sentimental towards this ice club, but my feelings are strong here. It gets a red flag for being generic. Look, I don't make the rules, it just gets a red flag for me. Like anyone can create this ice club, icy could, anyone could, I'm not impressed. Also, the next weapon we should talk about is Bloom's weapon. She uses an ordinary stick to whack out the ice crabs. It's really impressive that Bloom, without her magic, she still gets to fight alongside her friends. She just uses a non-magical tool just to fight. And as iconic and badass this scene is of Bloom using this weapon, I have to be honest with myself. This weapon has to get a red flag. Yes, I know that Bloom has been using this and it's iconic, but it doesn't change my mind how I feel about it. It is kind of dull and ugly looking and it blends to the background. Not good. But then we get to a really cool scene. Palladium has a sword. Also, it's not just any sword. This sword is so pretty. I love the handle of the sword. It's just so intricate. And the coloring of this blade is just translucent and orange. It's so beautiful. And not only that, it looks like Palladium is using magic alongside his sword. Not only that, I like the shape of the sword blade. It's kind of curved around the edge, kind of sideways. It's not like rivers where it's like curved upwards, like a saber. I think Palladium sword is completely different. However, nonetheless, it gets the high side of the yellow flag. We then have to talk about River's next weapon. He used it against the beetle roaches, so it seems to be like an electric rod. This is what he uses to zap the beetle roaches. This is kinda cool, however it's getting a yellow flag. I think this is the first time seeing Timmy using a sword. I think we have seen him using a sword previously, but we couldn't get a good screenshot of it. But this is the very good screenshot of Timmy using a sword, and it seems like a rapier, very long and thin. It's not his usual weapon, and it's not my favorite weapon for his. We all love Timmy using a gun. And honestly, it's less impressive than Sky's sword, so I would have to give it a yellow flag as well. I have no idea what this specialist is holding, but it looks really cool. It looks like a mace, but I'm not sure it is. You guys can let me know what this is, but it looks really cool. It's getting a green flag. In the next screenshot, we are seeing background specialists using bow and arrow. But of course, this is Winx Club. These aren't just any old bow and arrow. It seems like instead of arrows, we have energy beams. You know what? I'm sucker for bow and arrows. This is getting green flag as well. We're now moving on to screenshots from season 2. Maybe things will change here by introducing characters like Helia. Anyway, the next screenshot are guards from Light Monastery holding huge staffs. I have to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of these staffs, so I would have to give these a red flag. In the next screenshot, we have Templar guards from Light Monastery holding spears. I mean, what can I say? Spears are much more cooler than swords. And these spears look really nice. I can't decide if this needs to be green flag or yellow flag. However, it's not that impressive, so I would have to give these yellow flag. In the next screenshot, we can see it's some kind of unnamed device that Brandon used to blow up our door. I have no idea what this is, and it's not very interesting, but it is useful. I would have to give it a yellow flag. We then need to talk about Brandon's next weapon, which seems to be a small green dagger. I don't think we ever get to see this dagger ever again. This is probably the only time we see it, which I think is a shame, because I think it's really cool that Brandon used this weapon, and I don't think we ever seen a dagger before. I think Raven has a dagger along with his bowler, however he never uses it. I do think this weapon is really underrated, so I would have to give it a green flag. Anyway, let's talk about the next weapon, which seems to be Brandon's weapon, and it seems like a grapple hook. I know he uses this to, save himself and Stella. However, this sort of weapon can be used in battle as well. I wouldn't underestimate a grapple hook, and I think this is a standard basic weapon. I think I would have to give it a green flag. The next weapon that we need to discuss is the club that one of the Downlanders' guard carry. It's very big, meat and heavy. However, it's very dull and boring and very unappealing looking. And I would have to give this weapon a red flag. I'm including this as well. It's a needle that the downloader servers are using to help prepare Brandon. They jab it into Brandon even though it's very painful. You could hurt someone with this. However, it does seem really basic and boring and like an earth tool, so I would have to give it a red flag as well. The next weapon we need to discuss are the spears that the Downlander gods use. Like the other weapons, it's not very interesting looking. It's very plain and boring, and it's kind of worse looking of the spears. So I would have to give it a red flag. Then we're going to have to talk about this dagger that the Downlander god has been using. They were about to kill Stella in this scene. Yes, I do think it's kind of basic and boring, and you'd think I would give it a red flag, but this is a very deadly weapon. So I would have to give it the low side of the yellow flag. In this screenshot, we can see some senior specialists holding some sort of spear with a longer blade. I actually like the spears and I think they look really cool, so I would have to give these spears a green flag. We then get a screenshot of Riven's weapon, which seems to be a circular bomb. Riven uses this weapon during the Red Fountain event. Without hesitation, I would have to give it a yellow flag. And it's finally time to talk about Helia's weapon, which seems to be strings, which he uses to tangle monsters. This is Helia's primary weapon, and it's super iconic for him. Whenever he uses these strings, it makes me think of Spider-Man, and this adds to the iconicness. I wish Helia had more weapons like fan blades or bow and arrow. However, I do like this weapon and I think it, really identifies Helia, so I would have to give it a green flag. We have background specialists trying to do what Helia did, so they have this barrel where they shoot out string to tangle the monster. They are trying to be Helia, however the weapons aren't as cool, so I would have to give it a yellow flag. In Season 2, Episode 9, in one of the flashbacks, we see Viking-like warriors carrying some axes. I actually think these axes look really cool, so I would have to give them green flag. This is a sword used by the Angel of Doom, and it's so pretty looking. I love how the sword is shaped. This isn't any generic sword either. It looks like lightning. This is how you can improve a sword, and I would have to give it a green flag. We've talked about knives before, but we haven't talked about forks, and forks can be really useful as weapons. I remember one episode in iCarly where Ginger Fox threw a fork at Freddy's shoulder. So yes, forks can do so much damage. However, it is just a utensil, so I would have to give it a red flag. In the next screenshot, we get images of two different enchanted swords. Both look different to each other. The first sword is very ugly, boring looking. It looks like any generic sword that we can see on Earth. So I would have to give that one a red flag. However, the second sword is so beautiful. I love the orange color and I love the handle. It does remind me of Palladium sword, so I would have to give a high yellow flag. We then get a screenshot of a generic sword on the ground while Icy is trying to look for the codex. It's kind of very generic. I would have to give it a red flag. Anyway, let's talk about the weapons that the gang of Gardenia have been using. At least the ones that I could manage to get a screenshot out of. We got one of them holding a lead pipe, one of them holding a broken bottle, and one of them holding a silver chain. While I would give it a red flag, all three of them would lean on the higher end of the red flag, so it's not the worst weapons ever. You could do a lot of damage with a broken bottle. It reminds me of EastEnders. Chains are really interesting, and a lead pipe makes me think of Cluedo. We then going to have to point out the weapons that Brandon and Sky have been using while they were dancing. It seems like Wheel of Fire. While they were using it for a dance, this weapon can be used to set someone on fire. It is rather basic though, so I would have to give it a red flag. We then going to have to talk about the rake that Stella picked up in the Halloween episode. She drops the potential weapon that she could have used against the ghosts. I would give it a red flag, but I also like it. But it still gets a red flag for me. I accidentally skipped episode 14, and in that episode, we have full range of weapons. Starting off with Zing's weapon, when she has a disguise, she's holding a long stick. I would have to give this weapon a red flag. It is just a stick. There are much more better weapons in this episode alone, so let's move on. The next weapons are some shurikens. Kind of similar to Riven's shurikens, but these look much better. These weapons belong to Yoshinoya's guards. Although I really like these weapons, I would have to give it a yellow flag. The next weapon that these guards have are some strings, and they use it to try to strangle Brandon and Sky. You can't underestimate strings, they are useful for deadly purposes. And strangling someone is definitely deadly. But still, I would have to give it a yellow flag as well, as we didn't get much screen time of this weapon. The next weapon that the guard uses is a green sword. You know how I feel about these swords. I like them, but they're not the greatest weapons ever, so I would have to give it yellow. We then got to talk about this feathered dart. It actually belongs to Bo, one of the members of the Science Ninja team, or in the focus term, the Wrong Writers. I do think the Wrong Writers are iconic. However, this weapon alone isn't that outstanding, so I would have to give it a yellow flag. There are better weapons though. The next weapon we should talk about is this purple arrow thing. I can't tell you what this is. I couldn't get a good screenshot of it, no matter how much I tried. I think it also belongs to the Science Ninja team. I'm sorry, I couldn't get a good screenshot of it. I tried really hard, and because of that, I would have to give it a red flag. And on this screenshot alone, it doesn't seem that impressive anyway. So let's just keep going. Then we get a whole bunch of weapons coming through towards the Winx and the specialists. The next weapon seems to be green arrows. Yet again, I would have to give it a yellow flag. We then have nets coming their way to entrap them. It moves so fast. However, I have managed to get a screenshot out of it. I would have to give these a yellow flag as well. We then have some bamboo shoots. I would have to give this some credit. I do like bamboo shoots as weapons. So I would have to give these a high end of a yellow flag. It's just not ready to get a green flag. Okay, this weapon deserves a green flag. It's called a lipsticker and it's Dunkel's weapon. Having lipstick as a weapon is actually iconic. Now this is what I call a green flag. And then Bo has this electric light strings. He uses this to strangle Brandon. I think this is superior to the weapons that Yoshinoya Gods had because it can electrocute Brandon. So I would have to give it a green flag. We then have Jimpy with his computer, and with it he can launch missiles, and he did want to launch Flora. I feel like this is something what Techno would have. It's a shame that she doesn't have this. Either way, I think this is pretty cool and neat, so I would have to give this a green flag as well. Dunko also has this another weapon. It's another part of her makeup. I think it's the things that girls use as a foundationer. I'm not an expert in makeup, but she uses it to attack Bloom. This is also pretty iconic. Yes, this gets a green flag as well. We then see Jimpy using this helmet thing on Diaspro. I have no idea what this is or what it can do. So I have not seen what it, could do to Diaspro. So I would have to give this a red flag. The next weapon we're going to talk about is Nymphia's staff. It kind of resembles like a staff a mage would have. She uses it to cast magic or create the codex. It does add to her personality, however, I don't think she uses it that much. So I would have to give it a yellow flag. We then should talk about Princess Amentia's weapon, which seems to be some sort of trident. I'm not gonna lie, this does make Princess Amentia look badass. So I kind of have to give this trident a green flag. While I'm going to dismiss Princess Amentia's second weapon because it's simply just a shurikens like the ninjas used, let's just talk about her third weapon, which seems to be some sort of sword. You know how I feel about swords, so I would have to give it a yellow flag. The next weapon we should talk about is the weapon that Brandon uses, which seems to be a stick that he bashes a troll with. He tries to defend Layla or Stella with it. I would have to give this weapon a red flag because it's just a basic stick. You know what? We can't forget about Lockat's weapon, which seems to be a hair clip which she can turn into a key. And this key can show her which direction the person is or an object. With this, she can find anything, which is very useful for the group. It's kind of similar to how Stella's weapon is, when she had that ring that turns into a scepter. I wish the key had a better design though, so I would have to give it a yellow flag. We have seen axes before, like in the flashback in the episode about Angel of Doom. However, this time Sky uses kind of like a wood axe. He uses this to chop some logs, but he can also use that to attack people. However, this isn't as impressive as the axe before, so I would have to give it a yellow flag. In the 25th episode, we need to talk about the weapon that Kerbog has been using. When Lord Darker turned Kerbog into a monster, it carried a big giant battle axe. Completely different to the previous axes we've seen. It's much more bigger and much more deadly. So, I have to give respect to it. But even still, it gets a yellow flag. And finally, let's move on to Season 3 weapons. Maybe we'll get more weapons to discuss. Maybe Nabi will show his weapon. I also decided not to talk about Season 4 because I just want to talk about the first 3 seasons and their weapons. Hopefully, in the future, I can talk about season 4 onwards. I made this decision so this video doesn't get longer than it needs to. So the next weapon is to be like a spear that the mermaid god uses. The prong of this spear looks like a squid. I do think that makes a really unique design, so I would have to give it a yellow flag. In the next screenshot, we have Soleringas holding a weapon, which seems to look like a spear gun, at least that's what I think. I like the green blade on it. With this, they can shoot it out. I think this is pretty cool looking. It's not the best thing ever, but I think I like it. But I would have to give it a yellow flag. Along with the spear gun, the Solarian guards also have a shield. It's kind of golden colored. I think this fits well with the spears and makes it look good. So I would also have to give it a yellow flag. It just doesn't get a green flag territory yet. We do get this image of deep sea mermaids. They look very scary. And one of them is holding a golden trident. It does look scary, however, it's not the most impressive trident ever. It does look very metallic and generic, so I would have to give it a high end of the red flag. I think the next weapon we need to discuss is Teresa's weapon, which seems to be like a scimitar, at least that's what I think it is. It's a type of sword which I learnt. I mean, look how serrated the edges. It's like a shark teeth. It looks really deadly and powerful, so I can't, discredit it. However, I'm still gonna have to give it a high end of the yellow flag. And then we should talk about Queen Ligeia's weapon, which is a coral gem scepter. This weapon can heal people. Layla used this to heal Queen Ligeia. I think this is really impressive. However, I still have to give it high end of the yellow flag. It just doesn't cut the green flag yet. The next weapon we need to discuss are the weapons that are used by the Heraclean royal guards. And their weapon is similar to the weapon that the Solarian royal guard has been using, which is a spear gun, except their one is red. I mean, they're kind of similar. So whatever I rated for the Solarian one, I'm also giving the same rating for this one. So yeah. I think the head of Heraclean Royal Guard has a different weapon. And it seems like a saber, similar to Riven's saber. I have to give it a yellow flag. We then have to talk about the bow and arrow that Sky used. I think it's a similar bow and arrow we saw back in the Army of Decay, but I think this looks a little bit more upgraded. I don't know, I think it looks nice, and I'm a fan of bow and arrows, so I'm gonna have to give it a green flag. Sky tries to use this metallic axe. We have seen axes before, but you know what? I'm gonna have to give this one a yellow flag. The next weapon we should talk about is a weapon that belongs to one of the monsters of Omega Dimension. So with this monster, it basically has two spears attached to its arm, kind of like a gauntlet. I would say it does look really cool, however I would have to give it a yellow flag. Then this monster has a hook as a weapon. You know what? We don't see that many hooks in this show, and I think a hook is a pretty cool weapon, so I'm gonna have to give this one a green flag. This Andros Royal Guard is carrying a sword. It's kind of boring looking and very generic. I would have to give this one a red flag. We also have this Omega Dimension monster that has some sort of like a buzzsaw as a weapon. Okay, that's an impressive deadly weapon, and I would have to give that one a green flag. And then you have this monster carrying a whip. I fucking love whips, and I said this for with Carter Torta's weapon. I think they're just underrated, so I would have to give this weapon a green flag as well. Then we have this monster which seems to have claws. However, what seems like for these claws, it has two blades in both hands actually. You know what? I think this looks really sick. I'm gonna have to give this a green flag as well. We then get to see King Pterodon's weapon. It seems to be a sword. I do like the shape of the sword, but you know how I feel about these swords. It gets a yellow flag. The more I see these swords, I just give them yellow flags. The next weapon is King Oratel's sword, so I will include this as well. It kind of looks like King Pterodon's sword. I'm going to have to give it a yellow flag. The next weapon we need to discuss is Maya's weapon, which seems to be like a dragon-shaped staff. It does remind me of the staff that Saladin had, but this one is whiter and it has less details. Nonetheless, I do like this one, however, it's getting a yellow flag. We have these guys from Omega Dimension. They seem to be some kind of convexes. And we can see that they are holding like ugly poles. I kind of hated these guys, and their weapons are very disappointing looking. So I'm gonna have to give them a red flag. These Star Wars rejects also have ugly looking swords, so I'm obviously giving these a red flag. The next weapon worth discussing, it seems sort of like an anchor attached to a string. This weapon is owned by one of the convexes in Omega Dimension. I think it looks pretty cool. I think when it comes to the design, that's what gets me giving a high score. So this is getting a green flag. The convex also has like a piece of string. He uses it to tangle Techna. I do think this weapon is kind of lame though. I would have to give this a red flag. The convict was also about to use a dagger on Techna. Based on the design alone is getting a red flag. Wait, I never noticed this before. Does Helia have a sword? And why is it purple? Isn't his main color not orange? I don't know about this. I don't think this sword suits Helia, so I'm gonna have to give it a red flag. We also have two different convicts holding two different weapons. The first one is holding a TV aerial, and the second one is holding like a tusk, like elephant tusk. Both of these look really pretty cool for a weapon, so I'm giving both of these green flags. We finally get introduced to Naboo and his weapon, which seems to be a magic staff like any other wizards have been using. Kind of like Saladin and Maya, he also has it. Unfortunately, although I think a magic staff is pretty cool, this design of his staff isn't the most exciting of them all. However, I will just give it a yellow flag. If it had a better design, I would have given it a green flag. It's all about design for me. It doesn't matter how powerful an item is, the design is what gets a high score. The next weapon is Stormy's fan, and I would have to give this weapon a green flag. I really like her fan, and she uses it to make a gust of wind. I think this is something I would imagine Helia having, but I think it really suits Stormy, and I think she should use this in battle. Like I said, this gets a green flag. You know what? I will give Chimera this. At least her scepter looks better than Stella's, I'm gonna be honest with you. I like the gemstone in her scepter, and I think that improves a lot. I love the magenta color along with the diamond shape of her scepter. So this is what is getting a green flag. Anyway, did you see what Timmy was about to use as a weapon? He was about to use a wrench on Riven. And you know what? I'm counting this into this video. I mean, it is a creative weapon, but it is a basic Earth tool. So I don't know, I will have to give it a red flag. The next weapon seems to be some kind of trident, but there's only like two prongs. At least that's what I think it is. This weapon belongs to the Pegatar gods. I think this design of this weapon looks really nice, and I think it really deserves a green flag. We're almost over with this video, by the way. Anyway, the next weapon we're going to discuss is Saladin's weapon, which seems to be bowlers similar to Rivers. You know what? I'm gonna give Saladin this. I do like it. It's a little bit ropey though, but I will give it a green flag. I do like it. And finally, the last one, thank God. I made this video a while ago and I thought this was a good idea, but I'm finally glad this is over. Not gonna lie, I do like this video, but you don't know how many days it has taken me to make this video. It literally has been 3 weeks for this. So anyway, for the last weapon for this video is Sky's Fire Sword, and I'm glad we ended in this weapon because this weapon is sick. Usually I would put sword weapons in yellow flag, but this is how you give me a sword with a green flag. Make it elemental and make it shoot out fire. I'm glad we got to end this video in a green flag weapon. Anyway, it's time to decide which of these weapons is the best weapon in Winx Club. You know what? This weapon that I'm about to choose is the best Winx Club throughout the whole series. From season 1 to season 8, from spin offs to other Winx Club projects, this weapon or sets of weapons are the best aspect about Winx Club. And thank God we're over this right now because I'm not choosing to create new videos about this. I said it in my videos before, like maybe I might do one for like season 4 onwards. But like looking at how long this video is, I don't want to do this again. This video has given me trauma, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm not happy with this how long this video took. But finally it's over. It's time to reveal the best weapon in Winx Club. I mean, there's no point disguising it. You saw the thumbnail of this video. I think that should have given it away because that's how much little I care now. The best weapon in Winx Club throughout the history are the Trix's weapons, which are vacuums, or in the Focus version called the Whisperian Crystal. No weapon before or after could top this weapon. What I said before about the Whisperian Crystal, I still hold today. This is iconic. The way the Tricks have used this to create monsters and steal the dragon fire, nothing can top this. Not only is it powerful, it's also beautifully designed in each and every one of it. I was going to say, the other, the Tricks' weapon might be the Gloomix, but I don't count that as a weapon. I just count it as a power-up or a transformation. I don't count it as a weapon. So that being said, the best weapon in Winx Club ever, like I said, repeating myself again, are the Trix's Whisperian Crystals or Vacuum. In my opinion, the Focus version of this weapon The name is better. I think Whisperian Crystal is just a superior name. Anyway, thank God this is over. I don't want to ever do this ever again. This has given me trauma. If you like this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. You better subscribe and have a lovely day.